Welcome to TRINKtalks, the show that brings you the inspiring individuals behind the best bottles of German-speaking wine. In today's episode, we welcome winemaker and all-around fantastic individual from one of the most distinguished estates in the Pfalz region, Sophie Christmann of Weingut Christmann and Spätburgunder Christmann and Kaufmann. In our conversation, we plan to explore the future of German winemaking through the lens of the next generation. Sophie will talk about her love affair with Pinot Noir in both its still and sparkling expressions, and she'll touch on her approaches in the vineyard and cellar, as well as delving into how to define what makes a German Pinot Noir today.
Hello, everyone. I am also a huge fan of Pfalz Pinot Noir, especially the beautiful biodynamic Pinots that Sophie and her father make. Paula, with that, I think we're ready to begin.
Established in 1845, this family-run winery has built a legacy of high-quality, terroir-driven wines with a particular emphasis, as Valerie said, on biodynamic practices. Under the stewardship of Sophie Christmann, Sophie's father, the estate is celebrated for its signature Rieslings and Pinot Noirs, crafted with a commitment to sustainability and respect. Sophie represents the 8th generation, I hope, of winemaking at Weingut Christmann. Although wine was always a part of who and what she is, her formal studies included an international wine business degree at Geisenheim University and prestigious placements in both New Zealand and France. In 2017, she brought that theoretical, practical, and international experience home and officially joined the estate next to her father. From the beginning, she's shown a sure hand and even surer direction for the Christmann legacy, especially when it comes to Pinot Noir. And to confirm her superstar status, she is squeezing the session in right in the middle of harvest, for which we are extremely grateful. Sophie, for those not familiar with your estate, could you just tell us a little more about it?
Sure. So welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Sophie. I'm 31 years old, and as Paula said, I've joined the team here in the winery already 7 years ago, and now I'm running it with my father. And we are a very classic family estate here in Pfalz. So Pfalz is one of the southern wine growing regions in Germany. It's 1 hour south of Frankfurt. And our family estate has a little bit less than 20 hectares, so it's a quite average size here in the region. And we focus on Riesling and Pinot Noir.
Many growers would call Pinot Noir the red Riesling, and a growing number of German producers cite their experience with Riesling as an influence on their Pinot winemaking. Your estate specializes in both. How do the two inform each other?
I think so of course, like Riesling has for us like a way longer tradition, or maybe a longer focus than tradition maybe, but Riesling has always been the most important variety. So of course our view is always influenced by our view on Riesling, and what makes a great Riesling for us is the like elegance and playfulness, while the wine should still have power. And I think it's pretty much the same for Pinot Noir. I think if you want to make a heavy wine, then you wouldn't go for a Pinot, then you would go for another variety. And it's just the same with Riesling. If you want to have a heavy white wine, then you would never go for a Riesling. So both varieties are supposed to be elegant and playful, but still full of like pressure and length. And I think that's what brings them together. And that's also our like ambition and style for both of the varieties. Like I think if you make them, it's very different, because making a white wine is so different to making a red wine. But I think in style, yeah, it's the same approach. It's about elegance mostly.
What are some of the specifics that you learned? Well, maybe I should back up a step and just mention that you have done training and work with Tim Fröhlich in the Nahe and with Julian Huber in Baden. And those are 2 legendary estates for Riesling and Pinot Noir. What were some of the most important lessons you learned from those experiences?
I think it's like quite normal when you start your like career as a grower, and I think like I'm part of a younger generation where we like didn't grow up in the vineyards and the cellar. So when I graduated from school, I didn't know so much about wine. I know I was interested in it and I liked it. I hadn't been working in the estate yet. So at the Nahe, it was my first really working in a winery. And so there, I think I was mostly trying to survive the work in the steep slopes, and was not so much ready yet to really understand what Tim was doing. So looking back, I'd be very curious to go there again, because I think now I would understand so much more. I loved it there, and I loved it there with the family, and I'm still thankful that our vineyards are not so steep, because being there for the growing season was just so exhausting. But I think like the harvest with Julian in Baden was very different, because it was like my last harvest that I did in another place before I came home to the family estate. So of course I had learned and seen a lot, and I was like, going there was like really a strategic move to understand Pinot making. And so the harvest there, I was only there for 8 weeks, so it was not even a very long time. But I was able to understand so much about how an estate works that only does Pinot varieties and how different it is, and that was like super helpful for me.
What sort of things were you able to bring back in terms of, as you said, in Baden, they were focused just on the Pinot varieties. Pfalz obviously has a much wider catalog of grapes, and the growing conditions are very different. What sort of things did you learn from Julian or from Tim that you were able to bring back and implement in your own style? Did it change what you were thinking before you went, or not so much?
I think like with the harvest in Baden, I of course I learned how they run a Pinot fermentation, and that's what I just said to you earlier. A Pinot fermentation is so much work. It's like we do a remontage twice a day, we do a punch down 1 time a day during the core part of the fermentation. So I think making a Pinot is way more complicated, because there's so many more things that you need to do, and that's what I learned there. So that's also what I brought home, and what we of course have adjusted a little bit to like our philosophy, our style, and our region. But I think that's the core part of what I have learned there. It's because what I found so impressive there is that Pinot making is also about discipline and precision. I think it's just this weekend, for example, we had a break and we didn't pick, but of course we had to look after the Pinot fermentations every morning and every evening. And if you are exhausted after 2 weeks of picking on a Sunday evening, it's very tempting to just stay on the couch. But you need to do the remontage. It's just what you need to do. We'll have another 10 days ahead of us before we have pressed all the Pinots. And I think that's the precision that I learned there, that if you want to make a really great Pinot, it's of course about terroir and great grapes and great vineyard work, but all this potential can be lost in the cellar if you don't take care. And I think that's the main thing that has influenced me from the harvest in Baden.
Speaking of terroir, could you tell us a little bit more about the sites where you have Pinot planted and how that's been changing over the years since you did start out as a Riesling house?
So when I joined the team in 2017, we had roughly 12% of Pinot in our vineyards, and we have now increased it to 30%. And one part of the decision to focus so much on Pinot was the soils that our vineyards are growing on. Because here, we are part of the Mittelhart region, so of the core part of Pfalz, but in a part that is a little bit colder and a little bit higher in elevation than the very traditionally well-known parts in Deidesheim and Forst. And also our soils are very different. While you find sandstone in Deidesheim, we have lots of tertiary limestone with loam and clay in Königsbach and Gimmeldingen. So we have just a soil that is super similar to the soil in Burgundy. If you go to the vineyard, you see the dark brown soil with the white chunks of limestone on top of it. And we have very high limestone content in the deeper soil too. So it's sometimes quite complicated to find wines that can grow there. But it's the perfect soil for Pinot. And that was for us, the main reason why we thought that we should invest in it and try to increase the production, because it just fits so well.
Right. And can you tell us just a little bit more about the clones you have planted there? This is always a big topic for German Pinot Noir. And it's also been an area where there's been a lot of change in the last several years.
Yeah, I think like when I came home, I thought that we would have to replant all our Pinots with the modern Sélection Marsale from Burgundy, because I thought if you don't have that, you cannot, like you won't be able to make a great Pinot. Because I think when you talk to other growers, then you like quite often people talk about the most modern clones that you get from Burgundy and how you how they give the best quality and the smallest bunches and things like that. But luckily in the winery, things don't move so quickly. So we weren't able to replant everything within a year. And now working with the vineyards for a while, I would never give up our old vineyards. So now we have a bit of a balance. We have in the most important sites, we have old wines that my grandfather planted in the 70s and 80s. Luckily, before the time in the 90s when Germany had those very high yielding clones. So those are, of course, a little bit higher yielding than the French clones, and they have a bit bigger bunches. But we like them a lot, because if you look at the style of wine that you get, then the Sélection Marsale that you get from Burgundy at the moment is very dense, very spicy. It brings those nice berry fruits that I like a lot. But as another part, I also like those old wines a lot that always bring like a little bit more elegance, maybe a little bit more acidity, the transparency that Pinot also always has for me. That's something that I get a little bit more from the old wines. And that's the reason why we at the moment are preparing a new planting that we take from those old wines, because you can get them recrafted to plant them again. Because I think in the long-term perspective, I would like to have like both styles and both genetics in all our important Pinot vineyards. So of course we have planted quite a few Sélection Marsale, but what is also interesting is at the beginning, like my father has taught me to always plant like little trials. So when we plant, we always mix different clones because we want diversity in our vineyards, but we always plant 1 or 2 rows with every single clone so that we can look at the grapes and understand how they develop when they are a little bit older. And my father has planted the first French Pinot clones in 2008, and he's done it like that. And we have been able to look at them now for 15 years. And we have seen that here, if you buy a Sélection Marsale, then you get different yield level. Like you can buy supérieur, fin, and très fin. And très fin yields the lowest and is supposed to be the highest quality. It's what you plant for Grand Cru. But here with the très fin, we almost don't get any grapes because we only have about half the rainfall that Burgundy has. That's something that we had to understand. It took us a moment to realize that, because at the beginning I was asking colleagues and I was like looking to Burgundy and I thought we just have to do the same. But we always like we can look and we can learn, but we have to adjust to our conditions. And that's the reason why we now plant mostly supérieur and fin, and they yield between 20 and 30 hectoliters. So it's very low yield. So we wouldn't want them to yield any lower. And not only because we want to have at least some grapes in the cellar, but also because like if you yield too low, then the concentration will be too high in the wine. And it doesn't taste really good if it's too concentrated, I think. But so much about the clones. But it's a very interesting topic, I think.
It is. May I jump in with one last question then, Paul? It's all back to you. Just wanted to follow up and find out whether you are treating all of the Pinots the same way in the cellar.
So I have been raised with a very big terroir focus. So what has always been super important for my father is that like all Rieslings are treated exactly in the same way. Everything just gets pressed and goes into a barrel and ferments, and then it's the single vineyard Riesling that we want. And so we try not to influence the terroir. And with the Pinots, we pretty much do the same. For example, I also try to make like a whole bunch decision for the whole vintage. So we don't make like 10% here and 50% whole bunches there. And we look at the vintage and then we try to make a decision for the whole vintage. So we pretty much treat all the Pinots the same. Like, of course, like we have to react a little bit to the fermentations and how quick they go, but that's more like a question of how the fermentation goes and not of the terroir, because in some years one will ferment a little bit better than in another year and things like that. But so, yes, everything's treated the same.
I'm interested in something you said about 4 years ago when you and I spoke. You said, I still can't say exactly what makes a German Pinot Noir because the experience was still developing. I'm curious to hear what you learned since then. Do you feel any closer to being able to define what a Pfalz Pinot is? I know, speaking about a German Pinot, a Baden Pinot is very different from a Middle Rhine Pinot is different from a Pfalz Pinot. But in terms of a Pfalz Pinot, do you feel any closer 4 years later to being significant differences in vintage conditions? We've had hot, dry, wet, cold over the last couple of years. Do you feel any closer?
I think it's a tough question that I always have mixed feelings about, because I think if you would ask me for a definition of a Pfalz Riesling, I of course could give you a definition that I have like maybe learned and read about and things like that, but that might not necessarily be the interpretation of Pfalz Riesling that we make, or that many of the other great estates that also produce super high quality would make. So I think it's always complicated to give to describe a style. I think like we are coming a little bit closer to understand the style of the Pinots. For example, I would say that we now get the different styles of the different sites very well. It's something that has also taken a little while in like growing the different sites and making the separate bottlings to understand how they differ in style. And I think we are also approaching maybe like a first definition of style difference between, for example, Pfalz and Baden, because I think in Pfalz, the Pinots are usually a little bit lighter, a little bit more elegant. Maybe in Baden, they are a little bit rounder, a little bit more extraction. I'd also say a little bit darker in fruit. But I think I couldn't also define a Pinot from Burgundy. I wouldn't also be able to give a definition. So I think if we are very honest, I think we'll never be there.
Excellent. I think that's one of those important things to talk about, because I think so often people talk about, well, what is a German wine, or what is a German Pinot, or what is a German Riesling, and that there's so much more nuance, site-specific nuance, region-specific subdistricts. What about, let's take a different expression and talk about, you started the Sektgut Christmann and Kaufmann. What was that, in 2020, right?
19 already.
2019. Okay. There you're also focused on Pinot as well as Riesling with the two different lines. How do you find working with Pinot different in sparkling versus in still? Do you find that the same lessons can be applied to both, or do you handle it very differently?
I think it's making sparkling is a little bit more like making white wine, because you just press everything. And so, of course, it's for us, it's quite a bit of course, like the biggest difference is to making like Pinot for red wine, but it's also different how we treat also, for example, a Pinot Blanc for the winery and the Pinot Blanc for the sparkling, because for the sparklings, of course, everything is whole bunch pressed, and in the winery we don't do whole bunch pressing. So in the winery we crush the grapes, and we also allow them a little bit cloudier fermentations, I'd say. But apart from that, it's pretty much the same. It just gets like pressed, it goes into barrel, it ferments, and then it's either base wine for sparkling or a real wine.
You and your father are running the estate together. There's a generational difference there. There are all the things that come with working together as a parent and child, father and daughter especially. What are some of the biggest challenges and some of the biggest synergies of having two generations working side by side?
I think, like, for us, it's like when I joined the team here in 2017, I think at the beginning my father was a little bit surprised that I already wanted to start working in the winery. I was only 24 back then, but who was a great example for us was Philip Wittmann, who's still working next to his father. So of course now Philip has the main responsibility, but they have also had a quite long period in working together. And he always told us that it can be very nice to just share responsibilities and do it together. And so when I had finished studying and I was slowly looking to come home, my father and me, we talked about how things could go. And I think we have always had a very easy relationship. So I think none of us was really worried about it. But it was always good for us to split up a little bit on the responsibilities. So that's also the reason why I'm talking so much about Pinot, because that's the responsibility that I took over. And I think that was a very, very smart idea to split up a little bit, because I think it's quite tough if you join like such a well-known estate, and like I didn't want to be like the daughter who does the social media a little bit. I also wanted to make wine, so it was very nice that we divided responsibilities here a little bit, and I think also if you look at the development of the Pinots, like I think like if you look from the outside, it might look so easy, but it was also, of course, like we had to buy new tanks, new plantings, lots of barrels. So we were spending lots of money, and I changed the style of our Pinots like a lot from one year to another. And that's something that I think I wouldn't have dared to do alone, because I would have been afraid of like repelling our customers, spending too much money and things like that. And I think that's a great example how two generations can work with each other, because my father was always encouraging me to, he always said, like, we can do that. And I think it's a good idea and you keep going. And I think if I would have been alone, it would have been a way longer transition, because I would have been afraid of moving so fast. And that's where like the older generation can provide the stability and the experience that can make things in general move quicker than any of the generations could have done alone. And that's in general how we work. So, of course, we sometimes get in the fight, but I think every family is sometimes in the fight. And I think everyone is sometimes annoyed by their co-workers. So that's that's been quite easy. But no, I think we have adjusted a little bit on like how we work and how the generations work. But in general, it's been been quite easy, and it's now already like 7 years. And I think it will be another few years before he retires. And at the beginning, I thought a little bit, hopefully we can make it through those maybe 15 years or something like that. But now I don't think I want him to retire ever, because it's very handy to split up things.
If I'm not mistaken, you also did something pretty dramatic right at the beginning in terms of finding space for all of those barrels that you talked about, didn't you? If you could tell a little bit about that story, it's one I've never forgotten.
Yeah, we had to take out the restaurant. that we had here in the winery. Like we have always had a restaurant in the court of the winery in the cellar. It's been there for like 60 years, I think. And then we had made a little bit too much Pinot. Like the 17 and 18 vintage still fit in our like normal wine cellar, but then with the 19 vintage there was just no way that we could have fitted in like the normal wine cellar. And so since the last tenant of the restaurant had just left, and we just shut it down. It's been very nice because now it's quiet on the weekends in the winery. Been a good idea.
Perfect. I remember thinking that was so fantastic that you were able to come in and really have your own domain, not in the French chateau realm, but in terms of this was your space, quite literally and figuratively. Pinots were the place where you went and where you had your own space to play around and had the freedom within the family to be able to do that, which I think is fantastic and necessary when you're trying to step into shoes that are quite large.
Yeah,
in terms of your dad. There was something else that you did. Speaking of change, a couple of years ago, you took away your Gutswein and Ortswein, correctly, and started the idea of aus der ersten Lage. Can you talk a little bit about why you did that, how that's been received, and is this a trend that you sort of see others in the region considering doing?
So I think like if we are like super precise, then we only stop doing Ortswein. Because the aus den Lagen wine that we do is a Gutswein. So it's but I think if you like date back a little bit, I think that in general, there is a trend that is maybe slowly starting, that we have been maybe a little bit ahead of, is that wineries have to decide a little bit what they want to be. I think there has been a time where wineries have gotten quite big, but they still did the premium wines. But I think we are not really like in my opinion, I think you either need to focus on high quality, or you can do some entry level volume wines. I think it's very hard to do both. And for us, we have never wanted to do like a high, like a volume wine for something. And so my father has always declined all offers to do like a label corporation thing. And so the winery has never gotten really big. So in the peak, the winery was at 24 hectares. And already almost 20 of those 24 hectares were classified Erste or Große Lage. So we have always had a very high quality vineyard portfolio, which is very special, especially here in Pfalz, because if you look at on like in many of the well-known sites, the estates have like a very small parcel, while we own 4 hectares of Edic and 3.5 hectares of Vogelsang. So 7.5 hectares are in our 2 most important GG sites. So that's quite special. And so when we were looking at our range, we felt that that the focus on very high quality vineyards that we have, if you look into our vineyards, is not visible enough in our range because, of course, we did the Grand Cru and Premier Cru, Erste and Große Lage wines, but we did like a normal Pfalz Riesling. And while many colleagues do a Pfalz Riesling that comes from vineyards that no one really talks about, our Pfalz Riesling came from Erste and Große Lage vineyards. And so we thought we should make that visible. And we also wanted to decrease the amount of wine that we're making, because I think that German wine portfolios can sometimes be a little bit too complicated and too big. And so we thought we should focus, and mostly the focus was about the varieties, because we stopped growing Grauburgunder, Gewürztraminer, Muscatella, St. Laurent, and also most of the Weißburgunder. So now 98% of the vineyards are planted with Riesling and Pinot. So the changes that we did was mostly like focusing on the very best vineyards and making this focus public, and focusing on the varieties that we like best, that we think we can make the best wines with. But it was, I think it was So of course we didn't just decide it overnight. Like we talked about it for years before we made the final decision, and we also talked to all of our partners before we made a decision to see how they would react to such an changed portfolio. And in general, the reactions were really good, because I think it's just it's just so much easier to explain that now the winery works on 100% classified sites. All our vineyards are classified Erste and Große Lage. And so we only do single vineyard wines and one declassified wine from every variety that we grow. And that's it. And then I have explained everything. And it makes it just so much more easy to understand. And so that has worked very well for us. I know that among colleagues, it has I think like quite a few people have discussed it quite a lot, because I think it was a very interesting also approach that many people never thought about, because I think now we live in a time where everyone thinks that if you want to like survive and if you want to grow from an economic point of view, you also need to grow from the production side. But like our idea was that we can like grow from an economic point of view and like pay better wages to our team and everything, without growing the estate all the time. And I think that's an idea that, of course, many people started to discuss. And I think we will be seeing a few other estates that now, especially with like higher wages, inflation, higher energy costs, where people will decide that that wines that have like a lower price and a higher volume are not really the wines that we can earn money with if we want to work in a certain quality standard. And so I think it was also I think it was also inspiration for quite a few people, that there can be a little bit different approach for a winery, and that has worked very well. And of course, it's something that I think if you have a very like clear communication and clear idea, it's always interesting to see how people react. But in general, there was like, we didn't really get any bad reactions. I think most of the people were impressed and interested to see how it develops.
Before we move on to our audience questions, Sophie, I'm personally curious to know, what are some of your favorite Pinots to drink from the Pfalz, from Germany, from anywhere in the world?
I think like from the Pfalz, I of course really like the Rings Pinots, and I think they are also the people that we taste with the most, and that we swap wines, and that I have also been asking questions in the beginning. And then I think there won't be many news. Of course, like we drink Keller from Rheinhessen as well as from Baden. I think since Felix Keller has taken over the Pinots in Rheinhessen, like he's also a very good friend of mine, but he's also increased the quality quite a bit, and it's a very modern style. Then of course Franz Keller and Julian Huber. But also Fürst, for example. But also, like, we also love the Pinots from Burgundy. Some of them, not all of them. Some are too expensive, unfortunately. But something that I think is still reasonable in price, sometimes if you get a good access, is Du Rocher. That's an estate that we really love, and that we drink quite a bit.
Great. I think we just have one quick question before we let people go, and it comes from Karen, who's one of our faithful participants. Hi, Karen. She asks, how did the rest of the team accept you as one of the bosses when you joined?
So I think I was quite lucky, because like we have like two parts of the team. So one is the production and one is the office. And in the office, I think everyone was just quite happy that someone young was joining, who was like a bit more used to the computers and could fix more things. So there, it was super easy and very, no problem. In the production, like like exactly in the vintage, that was my first vintage here, our winemaker that had been with us for 15 years left. And and then the new person who joined had been working with me in an internship at Brooklyn Wolf. And so I'm now, after my father, the person who's been the longest part of the production team. So there is not really, because like then there's like one other person who's been there for a long time, but he's like the same age and he did his like apprenticeship in our estate. So so that's more on eye level, but I was lucky that there are not like some old people that were annoyed by the daughter with her ideas. So no, so that's been really nice and really okay.
Fantastic, thank you. Oops, it looks like Daniel just sent in a question as well, if you have just a few minutes to answer it. Daniel says, to go back to production, stem inclusion is on the rise, not only with you, but in general. Can you give some insights to the challenges and benefits you've been experiencing? Why do you feel it's a benefit now in your wines?
So I think if you look at it very precisely, in Germany, it's at the moment also a little bit discussed. So I think it's not only on the rise anymore. There are also some people that are decreasing a little bit. But I think it's mostly the people that have been working with very high percentages, like 50%, 80%. And when you talk to them, I think now you already heard that they are decreasing a little bit. I think in general, that a little bit of stems, I think you have to look at the whole fermentation, because our fermentations are very quick and our skin contact is very short. So the first Pinots that I have pressed today have been picked exactly 2 weeks ago. So we have only had 15 days of skin contact. Because the fermentation has been very quick, and once the fermentation is done, I usually want to separate the skins and stems from the juice, because the fermentation has been quite warm. And so when the warm fermentation then cools down and the stems are still in the tank, I think sometimes the aroma changes a little bit and you lose the precision in the fruit. So that's mainly the reason why I usually like to press on the day that the fermentation finishes. And like that, I have only like a certain amount of time that I have the skin contact. And during that time, I think that it's beneficial to get a little bit more tannins from the stems. I think if you only have the skins, then I think you might need a longer maceration. But since I want to press with the end of the fermentation, I need the stems to get a little bit more tannins and structure to the wine, because otherwise, in my opinion, it would be a little bit like it is. We have tried it, of course, and it is a little bit too soft and a little bit too much on like the berry aromas and maybe not serious enough. And so that's the reason why I like the stems to a certain amount. So I have never done 80 or 90% whole bunches or something like that, because I also don't want to have too much macération carbonique in the berries. So that's why we have always been working between 15 and 25%. And I don't think we will move out of that range so much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. And clearly STEM inclusion is the hot topic today. Colin Wagner also has a question. He's asking if increased STEM inclusion increases the need for chaptalization, and can you explain how those things work together?
I think usually not really, because in general, when we pick, then we have a certain amount of sugar, and then we like get a certain amount of alcohol. And if we are like not happy with the amount of alcohol that we get from the sugar, then we need to add sugar. So then we need to add sugar. But I think like the only thing that like maybe could increase the need is that maybe like with with stems, and you have even quicker fermentation, and with the quicker and warmer fermentation, you lose a little bit more alcohol. But that's something that I'm only also like slowly understanding, and that is very different from year to year. That we like, so I take like, when I do the remontage, then I take the Öxle every morning and every evening. And so we have like very precise information. And we see that in the Pinot fermentation, we lose between 0.5 and 1% alcohol during the fermentation, only from alcohol that you lose during the remontage in the air. Also because they are very warm. Like the fermentations are usually at 30 degrees in their peak. And so if they get like quite warm and you do lots of remontage, and like stems might increase the speed of the fermentation a little bit, and you might lose a little bit more alcohol, but it's in general something that I haven't brought together.
Sophie, can you just let us know where we can find your wines, find you, follow you, and where people can go to find your wines?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. And then we also have a great overview on our website where we list our partners in all countries. So wherever you are, you should be able to find the person that you can ask for the wine.
Terrific.
All of our listeners, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us. And to you, Sophie, thank you. Thank you.